Hello! It's been a while since my last video, but I think it's pretty worth it. For the past few months, I've been working on an entirely new game, and it looks like this. Now, my games are usually single-colored and mostly basic gameplay, and you might be questioning how I went from this type of game to this. And the answer is pretty simple. Between March 27th and April 12th, there was a competition called Beat the Boredom. This was my first ever programming competition, and as you can see, I did very well. Pretty amazing, eh? And during this time, I would work beside a person named Ugly Swedish Fish in the Hobson Community Discord server who made this game. Now, his game is pretty okay, alright, but I wanted to do something like it, and to do something more complex with shaders, add some textures, even better gameplay, and I thought the best way to do this would to create a horror game. And that's exactly what I did. However, if you've been wondering what else I've been doing aside from programming, here's a short compilation.
I've got this, man.
Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow
I
down.
didn't even do anything, man. It just started moving.
Oh wait, his tail's broken.
Wait, what?
And then just go all around.
Yo, this is sick.
Alright, good, good. Hobson, no! No!
Wait, what? What happened?
So first things first, the game needs textures. So after a few weeks of troubleshooting, I figured out that the newest version of Assimp hates me and won't load textures correctly. So I threw that out and put a much older version of Assimp, and I finally have textures working. I also got some help from a friend who taught me how to create lights using shaders, and I got directional light. In short, a directional light is a light which has a constant direction regardless of the position of the object. A real life example would be of the sun. Next thing I did was create point light, and a short example of this would be a lantern. For my game and within the engine, the position of the light is the player. So whenever I move around, the light would also be shown an object depending on how close I am and the direction, just like real light. Unfortunately, there are some issues that I would have to move around, such as if there is no normals, there are no light, attenuation values are very strict, and I can't do multiple lights yet. Next thing that my engine can do is collision detection. I previously made this in my Hug Me Please game, but I made it more dynamic and easier to use than before. It really is simple. But the thing is, there is a difference between collision detection and collision response. Right now, I can't do collision response. Next up, I added basic collision response. This is probably the part that will need a lot of rework and adjustments in future iterations of the engine, as it is very hard-coded and it's basically just a few if statements. Hopefully in the future I can get proper AABB collision response working, so then I can have more flexibility in my level design. Alright, so the next thing I created was view bobbing. Now to be fair, I did not create this entirely, as it was a friend of mine who helped me with the code. Originally, I had the view bobbing as the player's Y position moving up and down based on a simple sine formula. As expected, it worked, but it wasn't as smooth and dynamic as I wanted it to. This version was much better as it moved from left to right using the matrix formula for the camera rotation. The directional vector is a new concept I learned while making Hug Me Please. Basically, it gets the direction and length between me and a targeted object. Finally, omnidirectional audio. Omnidirectional audio basically means that the audio can be played from anywhere and can be heard from anywhere as long as it is within the sound limits as in real life. This gives realistic-ish sound location and can be heard from a distance and sound like it as well. The most important thing is also the fact that the sound has a very audible position, meaning that you can get an idea of where the sound is located just from the audio itself. Alright, now we're going to make a scene and get the models for the game. Now if you look at the time difference, you can see that this entirely took me around a month or two to create. And the simple reason is this. I kept redoing the models, triple choosing my main antagonist, and kept repositioning everything I wanted it to. After a while, I decided to use SCP-049 as the main antagonist. Originally, it was a Wendigo, then switched to SCP-2521, then SCP-96, and then I finally settled for SCP-049 for his audio files and a simple, easy story.
Hello.
Alright, so this is the time I started to program the actual game. However, throughout this entire process, I would procrastinate a lot and unfortunately not get a lot done. I started this project back in April, and then 4 months later I would actually start programming it, procrastinate a bit more, and then finish in November. However, in this clip, I started creating the phase functions and used my collision system for the map. Using player positions and a few if statements, I can tell the functions which phase I am in and which collision system values to use so that I can't leave the area. The if statements would be sort of like this. If the player would pass the x coordinate of 20, the function that will play will be based on these positions. Inside the function, it'll check player collision using specified coordinates as well. So, for example, if I wanted the player to stay within an xz box of -10, 10 for x and -5, 5 for z, I would input the coordinates like this and let the program run. Throughout my entire time programming, the hardest and most difficult part would be the GUI system. The basic idea of what I want it to be is basically what is shown on the front of the screen. I originally started with the crosshair code for my makeshift Minecraft game when I first started 3D. However, the system did not work well with my new engine, and it is a 3D plane being shown. I kept struggling with this issue for a while, and kept getting the same result. After some time, I reached out to a friend and we managed to come up with a simple solution. The idea is the same, a vector of coordinates and a mesh using a shader. However, this time we decided to make an XZ plane so that it'll be on the screen and not worry about the Z axis. The UV coordinates would also be 0 as the mesh class would be worrying about this. I'll also be using a custom shader for this specific GUI. I also then created a simple function that'll render the GUI based on a boolean called show. Finally, I decided to import all the models that I had so that I can get the positions and test their reaction to light. This is simply done by using the entity class I made in the engine, so there were no new model classes added. After a few days, I made an if statement that would figure out when the player footstep was to be played. Basically an if statement that checks my camera rotation angle. If it passes a specific point, it'll play the audio file. Really simple. After the issues with the GUI system, I started having issues with the audio system. To begin, the audio file locations on the computer will be in a text file that will be read and imported into an array of a string. That string array will then be used for its own audio class in the audio array. Several issues with this, but I'll explain that later. Unfortunately, that audio did not work and left me with a few questions. I then decided to make a new audio array. Basically, I'll be using a singular class for an audio category. For example, all SCP audio will be used in a class called SCP audio. All player audio in a player audio, all external audio inside an external audio class. This will save a lot of memory and time. Instead of having around 20 audio classes, I'll just have a few and reuse them whenever I need. However, another problem arose, and that's with the omnidirectional audio. It wasn't working. I checked the matrix formula, functions, and the audio file, but nothing. After a while, I then remembered the first time I actually got my audio system to work. I remembered Hobson quoting the SFML audio doc. Basically, most audio files are stereo. This will not work for directional audio. So, all I have to do is edit every single audio file and make it mono. The basic idea between stereo and mono is that mono tracks will output the same audio from both speakers. However, stereo tracks will often pan through the sounds, driving through different audio signals through the left and right speakers. Now that my audio is fixed, I started putting the audio for the player and the intro audio for the game. Basically, the player audio will have footsteps and the intro audio for a short introduction of what may come. After the basic audio is done, I started finding the perfect model positions for each model in the game. This is easily done by getting the X, Y, and Z coordinate of the player and placing the camera where I wanted the model to be. Then, put those coordinates into the model, and then the model is in position. Now, I decided to work on the first phase of the game. However, I wanted to get the logic out of the way first. Basically, I wanted the first phase function to play. However, if the player did not get the key at the start, he would not be able to leave the area. I tried booleans, getting the key, tried positions, everything, and nothing worked the way I wanted it to. It's at the same time I also put the GUI for the player, which a hand image will show up indicating that you are nearby to pick up the key which is beside you. After the large fail from not being able to do the phases correctly, I spotted that the fence would go back when the screen updated from the GUI, and I immediately knew why. When I originally created the fences, I wanted them to line up correctly like this. However, to achieve this, I inverted the textures and it made it look like it was inside out. Unfortunately, because of how I have light set up and because of the update from the GUI system, I would have to change the fence entirely. However, this was a simple task and took me around 30 minutes to finish. And in my opinion, it looks way better than this than the old version. Now that the model is completely done, I decided to work on the audio for the first phase. This was actually quite simple to implement. The entire code is literally an if statement that checks the time pass using ticks, and if the time passed a specific tick, it'll play a specific audio in the position I want it to be. All I had to do was place the audio far away and to get the timings right, and also make it sound scary. After all, this is a horror game. After putting a woman screaming, I put the SCP audio, and I was finished with the original first phase. The second and third phase were also pretty simple. The entire code inside the function is one or two audio files being played in the background. Scene 3 would have a few SCP dialogues, and Scene 4 would have a tree falling in the distance. Not hard at all to implement. However, the last phase took the most time. After 2 hours, this phase would be completed. Now, spoiler alert, I was extremely tired and wanted to finish this game as quickly as possible. So most of the original ideas were not implemented in the end result. For example, the ring would be removed, the key wouldn't be as important, and SCP movements wouldn't be as complicated as I wanted it to be. And the end result of the game would also be different. To begin, I wanted to check if the player clicked on the door with the key for the door to disappear, and this was much harder than what it should have been, because I forgot that I wanted the door to have a smooth animation and play an audio file. However, that never happened. Next, I wanted the SCP to move to a specific location. Now, as of writing the script, I'm working on a semi-physics engine, and I found a much easier way for a model to move towards an object without using the movement vector with if statements. As you were watching, I'm writing a movement vector that would move the model by 0.1 to the right of the scene. Then, if the model location was over a specific value, it would stop and do the next movement by taking the model out of the house. However, after figuring out that this would not work properly, and by looking at the time, I decided to scratch this idea altogether and work out another solution. The next solution would basically be this. If the player looked inside the window, the SCP would leave. If the player opened the door before looking into the window, the SCP would disappear and start playing sound effects all around the player and then kill the player. This was quite simple to implement, as I did not have to worry about the SCP movements, and I just had to worry about timings and audio files. Eventually, the audio files would be finished, and I could finally say that the game was finished. There are lots of things that can be said about this game. It's horrible, buggy, and even the reason as to why dinosaurs went extinct. However, I believe that creating a game for yourself is just that. It's for yourself. As long as you learned something along the way, and was able to create something better than last, that game is amazing. And that's why I believe that no one should feel intimidated to show others their newest project. You learned something. You became better. No reason to feel bad for what others say. You know inside you that you did something you could not even think of doing, and the result is right in front of you. Of course, it could be better, but you still managed to do it. And that's what these projects are for. I'd like to thank News, Poing, Cloud Shader, Hobson, Bag, and more from the Hobson Community Discord server who helped me gain my motivation and helped me continue working on this project to the end. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.